Hey everyone, this is Mike. Robbie's going to be joining me in a second. I wanted to introduce today's guest. It is the one and only Brad Stulberg, co-author of Peak Performance with Steve Magness, who we've also had on the show. To say this book hits home with Robbie and I is an understatement. We were both blown away. We got an advance copy, and it is to be released June 6th, but you can pre-order it, and we would like to ask all of you to do that to help these guys drive their numbers up and get them off to a good start, because this book will be your favorite book about endurance and or improving your life. It is a deep dive into essentially the formula they want to talk about is how stress plus rest equals growth. And there are numerous examples of how to break through to get to your next level. And I really feel like this is going to be my reference manual for life. I really believe that. It's that good a book. And the interview is great. Brad is a super guy, and he goes into a lot of really cool stories, and I totally think you're going to enjoy this podcast. I just wanted to read a line from the book that says, "There is nothing more gratifying or fulfilling than setting a goal on the outer boundaries of what we think is possible and then systematically pursuing it." Take that into this podcast and enjoy. What's up, Robbie?
Hey, man. What's cracking?
Not too much. Just got back from Knoxville. Looking forward to the big weekend, holiday weekend. What do you got planned?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Actually, I was really kind of looking forward to, you know me. I'm not much of a get out and do stuff. I'll get a few runs in, for sure. Hang out with the family, and then I think we had dinner with my grandma last night. She's 88, and she was asking us, what are you doing for Memorial Day? And I was like, probably not much. And she was like, oh, don't you just love a good hot dog? And I was like, I mean, kinda. I think hot dogs are a little overrated in my opinion, but sure. I think nothing wrong with a good hot dog. She's like, I just love a good hot dog for Memorial Day. And I was like, well, Mimi, would you like me to grill out on Monday? Oh, that'd be great. And I was like, oh, so I'll grill out some hot dogs for Mimi, and probably watch a little bit of the Preds game.
That sounds good. That's
about it, though.
Yeah. For me, I'm just gonna find the courage to rest this weekend.
You're a professional rester. I'm not sure if you need the courage to. Well, you're a professional rester.
Yeah, and then on Tuesday, since I just had my race last weekend, I'm going to start to stress myself again. Thanks to the inspiration from this unbelievable book, Peak Performance, and the co-author is joining us today. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be recording with you guys. Big fan of what you do.
Oh, man, that's awesome to hear. I got to admit, I'm a little bit nervous because that book is so good that I feel like I'm a little bit blown away right now. But I guess that's kind of part of the whole thing, right, is you got to push yourself to the limits.
Yeah, something like that. I'm glad that you think the book is so good. I hope listeners agree. It's a nerve-wracking process, man. You guys got an early copy, but the rest of the world hasn't seen it, and I'm super self-conscious about my writing. So it means a lot to me that you say that. Hopefully other people agree.
Well, definitely. And so as a breakdown, essentially for everybody listening, the book is called Peak Performance, and it's really more than, while it applies to athletic performance, without sounding cliche, it really is a kind of a game plan for life and how to deal with stress, how to use stress in proper ways, and how to combine that with rest and find some growth. But before we get into it a little bit more, Brad, you want to kind of go in a little bit about your background, because I found it really interesting that you're like a high-flying financial guy.
Yeah, so coming right out of undergraduate school, I took a job at a corporate management and strategy consulting firm called McKinsey & Company. And it's one of the top consulting firms in the world. That's probably a factual statement to say that. And I did really well there. I was a high performer. I got great reviews. It wasn't long before I was as a 23, 22 and a half year old in the boardroom giving advice to CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world. It was thrilling. I absolutely loved it. The work was super intellectually stimulating. The people that I was around were extremely driven. And what a neat chance to make an impact is really just a young kid. The problem was I could not turn it off. The work itself was quite demanding, so I'd say that my regular week was probably a 65 to 80 hour work week, which in and of itself, that's just a lot of hours to be working full tilt. But even beyond that, I really struggled mightily to step away from the work. So an example that I like to give is I'd be on the phone and maybe I'd be calling my grandmother or my then girlfriend, now wife, or my parents. And even though I'd be talking to them, my mind would be somewhere else. It would be in the work. Be like, I'm on the second tab of the financial model that I'm building or the 19th slide in the PowerPoint deck. It was completely all consuming. And I burnt out pretty hard after about 2 years, a little shy of 2 years doing that type of work. Just mentally and even to some extent physically, I became tired, kind of apathetic toward it, and my performance fell off a cliff. So yeah, that's my background there. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to pivot. So right around the time I was realizing that however I was approaching that work in consulting was just not going to be sustainable, I decided to go to public health school and study healthcare, but also just health and wellness and kind of what makes someone healthy, and especially at a time in my life when I wasn't necessarily feeling so healthy. Went to the University of Michigan, studied public health, and coming out of public health school, that's when I started expressing my thinking in the research that I was doing into writing, and slowly kind of started building a career as a writer from there on.
Very cool.
Man, I got before we get too deeper, I've got to thank Brad for turning me on to Ryan Holiday.
Oh, there you go.
Ryan is a stellar writer.
Man, yeah, I think you shared something via Twitter, or may have even written some kind of a portion of covering his Obstacle is the Way book, and there's in some avenue, but that book 100% totally changed my life in a million different directions. It's an incredible book, but I just want to say that before we get rolling the book, I admire your change in direction from a professional standpoint. I think that takes a lot of guts and a lot of trust, I guess is another way to put it. But and obviously, I think you're reaping the benefits now, and I know it's got to be pretty cool to see this first book finally coming to fruition and coming out. What, June 6th?
Yes, June 6th.
That's awesome, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely took guts, but at the time it didn't necessarily feel like it was taking guts. It was just kind of I was following my interest and I knew that if I was going to go down this different path, I'd really have to give it my all and just kind of hope that it would work out. And who knows if it'll work out. I'll tell you 50 years from now.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but you're in the moment now, and of course, I'm gonna sort of the beginning of the book just is kind of what floored me, because you got really into stuff that I think a lot of people think about, and we know that in modern society with all the distractions and multitasking, and then you kind of got into Adderall and steroid use and just the stuff that people are kind of using to get the advantage and things like that. In a way, we're kind of a mess, but I like the fact that you sort of just took a realistic perspective on that, and then at some point, obviously, you connected with Steve and decided that these kind of things need to be addressed, and obviously you can kind of overcome them with logical and consistent work. So, you want to talk about where the book came from and how you met Steve, and then we'll get into the book a little bit more.
Yeah. So Steve and I, we had just followed each other's work. Really through Twitter predominantly, and it's kind of funny because there's a whole section in the book about how it's very good to turn off your phone every once in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were pretty clear in the book that we're not going to bash technology because we met on social media. I followed Steve's blog. He followed some of the stuff that I had been writing. And we just started emailing back and forth and almost established like a pen pal type relationship. And, eventually we spoke on the phone and did a few Skype sessions because we were thinking about and writing about similar things. And, maybe like a year and a half or a year or so into our little pen pal relationship, I felt like we had enough mutual trust where I could toss him this idea for a book that I had. So I sent him the idea for the book that is Peak Performance, and I'll never forget his response was like, dude, you're not going to believe this, but I've been thinking about the exact same book, and here's 90 pages of my notes to prove it. So then I looked through his notes, and I'm like, well, there's no, like, A, I trust Steve. B, there's no way that he came up with this in the last 45 minutes. And C, there's like a good 70 to 80% overlap in the research that he had been doing and the stuff that I had been thinking about. So we quickly got on the phone and decided that it would make sense to team up and do this together versus try to do it separately.
Man, that is unbelievable.
Yeah, and then it's funny. So then before we like fully committed, Steve came to San Francisco. It's almost like online dating, right? Like you start like on social media and like we have similar interests, and then you kind of email, and then you do a video chat, and then a phone call, and the next thing you know, you meet. So yeah, he came out to San Francisco. We spent a few days together, and we decided that we were compatible to work on a book.
It was love at first sight, man.
Yeah. So the you guys got a plant, and then moved up to a dog, and then you decided to write a book.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because there were times during the book writing process where my actual wife, Caitlin, was super supportive and patient for the amount of time I spent with my book writing wife, Steve.
Well, that's awesome, man. Okay, so he was thinking a lot about stress and that kind of stuff. And obviously, I mean, I kind of like the way I describe this book is it's sort of like the science of performance collides with eloquent storytelling. And it resonates so deeply to me. But like, you want to get into this a little bit and talk about just stress in general and how people think it's harmful, but in reality, it's a great tool to use if we know what we're doing.
So before I go there, and I will absolutely do that, I think the other thing, worth pointing out is that Steve had a very parallel path to me, albeit just in a different field. So while I was, grinding hard at McKinsey, Steve was a world-class runner. The guy ran a 4:01 mile. And similarly, he became pretty obsessive about his training and ultimately trained himself into the ground. And I think, I forgot if it was you, Mike, or Robbie that mentioned the stuff about Adderall and stimulants. What we saw around us was lots of people were, in Steve's world, turning to doping and performance-enhancing drugs, and in my world, turning to various stimulants like using Adderall illicitly or worse. And people were taking these extreme measures to try to sustain the clip and the pace of performance that they were working at. And that's where we both kind of came together and said, this can't be the best way to do it. I mean, it's not healthy, it's not ethical, so there's got to be a better way. And that conversation was also really integral to the genesis of the book. So now to answer your actual question on stress. So what we found is that in both through the research that we did as well as the reporting, a lot of the world-class performers that we spoke with, is that stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. Stress is actually a really good thing. It's the catalyst to how you grow. And whether that's growing a muscle, like a physical muscle, or growing emotionally, or growing cognitively, so being able to take on more projects at your desk job per se, growing intellectually, you need to apply some sort of stimulus. And I think the easiest way to explain it is if you think about your biceps muscle in your arm.
Okay.
If you pick up way too heavy of a weight and you try to lift it, odds are you either just straight up won't be able to, and you'll be real discouraged. You'll be like, screw this, or you'll injure yourself. Like, you'll throw your back out, you'll tear your biceps tendon. If you pick up way too light of a weight, like a 1 or 2 pound weight, you could sit there and do biceps curls all day, but your muscle is probably not going to grow. So how you make your biceps muscle bigger is you have to find a weight that challenges it and stresses it, and maybe you even work it very, very close to failure. But then after you do that, you have to back off and let your biceps recover. And then the muscle gets a little bit stronger, and you gain the capacity to take on a little bit more stress. In the triathlon world, it's in endurance sports more broadly, it's known as periodization. So this notion that you want to have your hard days really hard and then follow them with easy days. In physiology, that's been studied for literally 100 years now. That's how the body grows. What's super interesting is in researching the book, we found that the mind grows very, very similarly to the body. So you do want to have periods of intense focus or intense workload where you're completely uncomfortable and you're pushing yourself right to that point of fatigue. But that's only beneficial if you then back off to let yourself recover from that. And B, there's actually tons of neuroscience that your brain doesn't really make sense of all that information and doesn't retain it while you're working. That happens while you're sleeping, while you're daydreaming, while you're out on a nature walk, while you're not working really hard. So that led us to come up with what in the book we call the growth equation, which is this notion that stress plus rest equals growth. And that holds true for how an athlete ought to develop his or her career, how a thinking person ought to develop their career, and even the artists that we spoke with reported a very similar story, which is periods of like intense, creative burst in work, followed by stepping away from it and kind of recharging and coming back with new insight.
That has been, as a coach and coming from like a point of view to where, I think coaching really any kind of athlete, the coach's main job is to slow people down than it is to speed people up, and they want to create more stress. But I found that that simple yet as I think Mike said, like eloquent way of putting it, stress plus rest equals growth. How difficult that is, how difficult that actually has become. And you alluded to this, I believe earlier in the book somewhere. It was almost like not war against the machine, but maybe it was like competing against the machines. Is that there's so much science out there and so many, and now everything is so data driven that it like almost eliminates your freedom to like consciously take your own rest, because you see everything else being multiplied and done times over because there is so much technology going on. Do you feel like that, from what you found, that has really amplified? I think high performing athletes in general have a hard time resting, because I think it's just how they're wired. They're incredibly intrinsically motivated. Then you put them in an environment that adds on external motivation, and then competition. But now, do you feel like that is like compounded, that kind of what I would consider like almost an epidemic? Whether it's within athletic performance or work. It's like people have this badge of honor of I don't have time to sleep. I'm working too much. I'm like, well, then you're not probably getting near as much done as you would. Yeah. But have you found that the from your your research and then just doing this book that has compounded kind of the epidemic that is no rest?
No doubt. I definitely think so. Technology, I think, just encourages us to always be on or tracking towards more miles or more hours of training, or responding to more emails more quickly, or more Facebook posts or more tweets. Like there's a million different things that is constantly like on, which makes it a lot more challenging for a lot of people to turn off per se.
Yeah, and there's a great quote in the book that says, I think it's at 99% of the 99% for 99% of the people, effective multitasking is effective delusional thinking.
Yeah, that is right. I just yesterday had a story run in New York Magazine on this. It's one of my favorite topics. So there's some really neat research that shows that if you get a group of people that claim to be great multitaskers, and you put them in an fMRI machine, which allows researchers to look at their brain activity, and you have them multitask, what ends up happening is that their brain is actually switching between tasks at like a millisecond level, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, or quite literally like dividing and conquering. So instead of bringing your full cognitive focus and your full attention to the task, your brain's like devoting 50% to each. So that's like really interesting when you're in the machine. Then they take these people out of the machine and they actually go have them multitask versus single task. And what they find is when they're multitasking, they accomplish 40% less over a given time period than when they're single tasking.
Wow.
So it's like the ultimate paradox, which is when you're multitasking, you think that you're getting twice as much done because it feels like you're doing twice as much, but actually you're getting half as much done.
It's busy work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's busy work or the quality of the work is shitty. So, yeah, like it's either busy work, but even if it's busy work, I think these researchers would say it's better to do one thing at a time on the busy work because you'll work a lot faster. So it's like this need for immediate gratification to feel like, oh, I'm doing so much at once, I'm multitasking. But if you were to actually track on an N of 1, you individually, all the stuff that you do over 2 days and kind of have a period where you multitask and a period where you don't, my guess is you have more productive value as you're single tasking than as you're multitasking.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there quick because I want to ask how that may relate, or if you have a theory on what that would do. Like, for example, if a triathlete is on a treadmill or a trainer and they're surfing their phone, you know what I mean? It's like, is the distraction taken away from the workout? I mean, I think obviously it must be, but I mean, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are specifically as that may apply to a workout or something like that.
So it's interesting that you asked this question, and hopefully we won't go down too much of a wormhole with this topic. So I think that the answer there is it depends.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, if the point of the workout is to have the athlete really focus on hitting certain numbers or focus on how their body feels, or focus on kind of, I guess this is how their body feels, but if it's like a threshold workout and you want to push them right to an edge but not over it and really have the athlete internalize what that means, then absolutely any kind of multitasking would take away from their ability to really zone in focus. Or if it's learning a new skill, right? If you're teaching a cyclist how to pedal stroke differently, or maybe teaching them what it's like to ride at a lower RPM, for learning to occur, you want that athlete completely there, zoned in. And yes, that means even if it's on the trainer. I mean, maybe background music is fine, but you don't want to have them scrolling through social media, reading a book, unless it's this book, of course. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, you want the athlete completely there. Now, where it gets interesting is, and this is not in the book, this is just some neat exercise science research that I've been fortunate to cover for Outside Magazine, is there's a guy named Samuele Marcora. He's an exercise scientist in Italy. And what he has found is there are certain specific workouts where if you have an athlete multitask, but have them focus on something that is dense and that they don't want to be doing, at the same time they're holding a relatively harder effort, it almost trains their brain to like put up with more discomfort. So then when you remove whatever they're focusing on, that effort feels easier. So the example would be if you're on a trainer and let's say you're doing like a zone 1 or zone 2 ride at maybe 80% effort. So it's not easy, but it's not like a hard effort that demands all your focus. And then you tell that same person that they need to read like a scientific journal or pay close attention to a radio interview that's pretty dense. Having them hold that uncomfortable effort while also forcing themselves to pay attention to something when all they want to do is zone out, that can actually have huge benefits for their ability to put up with fatigue later on.
Wow.
You know, that's really interesting that you say that. When I was in, I'll try and put a dam or a stopper on this wormhole we're heading down, but when I was training for Ironman Wisconsin last year, it was my wife and I had our first child July 20th, and he was in the NICU for a couple days, and she had difficult pregnancy. So I was stuck on the trainer for like 5 to 6 hours. And sometimes when I would do these easy rides, I would actually, or the easy portion of my rides, I would actually log on to to Z-Swift and just kind of like, meander around, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool with the scenery. And then as soon as the harder efforts began, the other people involved in that simulation, literally, I immediately got distracted. And so I would turn on Netflix within probably the first interval and watch Sons of Anarchy, which I was like blazing through because I needed something to distract myself. But it made the time go by quicker, and I found myself able to withstand not like the threshold like max out ever puts, but more like a higher tempo effort for me that I was able to just kind of grind through rather than because my mind was focused on watching Netflix and paying attention to the TV show. So I wonder if that had any kind of correlation to what he was finding, but I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I almost think he was saying the opposite, which is like if you were forcing yourself to like watch like a really dense documentary on a historical topic. So what he's saying is you don't want to zone out to make it feel easier. He's saying you want to do something that like makes you zone in so it feels harder.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting, man. So let's talk about and that all relates to growth, obviously, and that's what he was saying is that the harder it becomes, the more you kind of hit that growth threshold. So in the book, you guys talk about something called just manageable challenges. Do you want to go into that a little bit for us and explain what that means and how it affects, improvement, specifically maybe in endurance and things and triathlon and stuff like that?
So a just manageable challenge is something that is ever so slightly outside of your comfort zone. So it's not something that is going to make you anxious to the point where like you feel your heartbeat in your neck, but it is something that gets you aroused in the sense that like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to nail this workout, or that pace seems a little bit too fast. I don't know how this is going to go. And it's finding those kinds of workouts, again, what we call in the book a just manageable challenge. That's like the perfect level of stress. So you want to be, like I said, ever so slightly outside of your comfort zone. In those workouts, physiologically speaking, they provide just a great stimulus. And B, psychologically, they help you get comfortable with being uncomfortable, which I think is like the number one skill for endurance athletes.
I would agree, Robbie.
Yeah, I think that's the name of the game is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And to kind of go back to what I was just saying, I feel like that my Netflix addiction probably had worked into my detriment, because I wasn't absorbing the being uncomfortable. So when I got actually on the course, I wasn't used to the comfort because I was kind of going off into a different zone. But no, I think that there's a certain level of fear that comes with planning something, like you said, that makes it manageable. And I think it's like finding that sweet spot. That's probably the hardest, as far as making it, like I said, a just manageable challenge. I wish there was a book for that.
But Brad, didn't you say that repeated kind of practice of that, of pushing yourself just beyond the edge of your comfort zone and everything, isn't that sort of where the intersection of this concept of being in the flow comes in?
Totally. And flow is kind of an age-old concept in psychology, which is like when you're totally in the zone and you become immersed in what you're doing. Perception of time can change. You're just like in it. And what the research shows is that the best way to get into that zone is to take on these just manageable challenges. So they're in the case of sports, they're workouts that are definitely not just going through the motions, but they're also not so crazy that like you're going to freak out. So I think an example that we give in the book is Steve Magness, my co-author, coaches Sarah Hall, who's one of the top American women marathoners right now. Mm-hmm. And he talks about giving her workouts that it's not that she knows that she can't do them. I would argue that is like too much of a challenge and would lead to psychological distress and ultimately physical distress. But the way that Sarah describes it is they're workouts that she's not sure if she can do. And I think that's like the total sweet spot. And it requires an athlete, being okay with quote unquote failing and coming up short. Like, I think especially triathletes have a tendency to need to hit the numbers every single time.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you're hitting the numbers every single time, you're probably not pushing hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
But if you also go out and completely kill yourself and you have a 5-by-mile workout, let's say, and you go out at a pace that only allows you to run the first 2, well, then you're just being an idiot. But like, I think that if every once in a while, maybe you blow up on that 4th mile or midway through the 5th mile, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that's like, okay, like I'm willing to fail because I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And again, this is not a license to go crush yourself 3 times a week every week, right? This fits within that framework of stress plus rest equals growth. But I think what ends up happening is a lot of people are scared to really stress themselves, but they're also scared to really rest. So they kind of end up in this middle zone where they're never really working as hard as they're capable of, but they're also never going easy. And then you just get trapped in this vicious cycle where you can't go super hard because you're never recovered. But the reason that you're never recovered is because you don't have the confidence to go super hard and then rest.
It's like the literary gray zone that they tell you to avoid in training, that you can handle just enough of and do it too much to be overtrained, but you never go too hard and you never go too easy.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that, well, I mean, again, not to be cliche, but this is something that well beyond sport, right? This is your career. It can be your relationship. Like, I think that we tend to go to these two extremes, which is, one is like push hard all the time, nonstop, highest level stress, no rest. And that is ultimately going to lead to a decline in performance in burnout. Or the flip side is kind of like a fear to take on more, and then you kind of get stuck in this going through the motions gray zone.
There was a line that I wrote down. Developing a new capability requires effort. Skills come from struggle. And I think it's such a simple way of putting it. I think you both find yourself emotionally and mentally, but also force yourself into paying attention to that, whatever specific physical craft it is. It's something that I read often about that Katie Ledecky does, is that she'll set these, just like you said, it's manageable, just so out there that it's a manageable challenge. Like maybe it's just 2 seconds for her, 2 seconds per 100, which for her is like a light year for most people, with how fast she is. But that she does that often, and she fails, I guess, quote unquote fails, in practice a lot, because she's not afraid to see if she can or can't make this interval she's never made before. And, for her, I think the results obviously speak for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think like really practical advice for a triathlete would be if you're, let's say that you have, 2 or 3 workouts a week, and you're nailing all your workouts, and you have been for the last month, maybe if it's on the bike, take your power or your heart rate goal, or if it's running, take pace. And before you set out to do your tempo workout or your threshold workout, just like up the ante by about 2%. And whether that's on the power or the pace or the heart rate or the duration that you're going to do the workout, and see what happens. And again, don't do that 3 times a week every week, but maybe do that twice a month. And talk to your coach, or if you're self-coached, make sure that you're padding that with enough rest to absorb it. And in my hunch is a lot of listeners will surprise themselves, and they'll hit those workouts more often than they think. And even if they don't hit those workouts, they'll get a better adaptation from trying.
Yeah, now I think real quick question, one more on stress, and then we can kind of go into the rest part of this. You talk about blocks of stress and how people can rarely sustain intense work and concentration for more. I think it was more than 2 hours without a break. I mean, we don't have to stay onto that, but just in general, this concept of blocks of stress and how it's good to go focused for an hour and a half or 2 hours, whether it be work or maybe training or whatever, and then take some rest to recover, whether it be walking or, not like an active recovery. But my question, what popped up to me in that was, If you think about like Ironman, for example, and you got maybe a 12-hour day, I mean, is there sort of a thing in there where you should kind of break up your race a little bit? I mean, it might be out of the blue question, but not necessarily the rest, but just sort of like go hard maybe, or go to your limits and then maybe back down. Does that recovery process happen in the course of a race like that?
I don't think so. I think that's what makes Ironman interesting, right? It's like an over-distance race that, I mean, physiologically the body does not carry near enough glycogen, so fuel on board, and psychologically the body is not accustomed to focusing for that long, and I think that's what makes an Ironman such an interesting experience for those that do them.
Okay, so I can't just lay down for a few minutes. I could, I suppose.
You could.
So you want to lead us into my favorite topic, Robbie, rest?
Oh yeah, I think if anybody's listened to this podcast, they know that you are the king, and it's not a paradox to you, but at all. But I have just now become like having a 10-month-old who doesn't sleep a lot. This has taken on like a whole new importance for me, or at least the determination to try and get as much rest as possible. Because used to, like before in my athletic career, I would just kind of sleep, and now it's a commodity. I mean, it really is. And to read something that I forget about that you touched on in the book was what it does not just for your body but for your brain. And that was something that hit me. It hit me pretty good as far as I'm like, oh, you needed to recover your body and recover from training, and like, oh yeah, your mind. You needed to recover and be able to function and perform better, because it all starts up top. And then I'm a huge fan of meditation, and so and so the turning it off and being present within the moment. And I think we even touched a little bit of that with Steve when he was on our earlier podcast, was just that how underrated mindfulness is when it comes to peak performance or elite sport, however you want to phrase it, but how important it is and how underrated having that ability can be for someone looking to kind of go to the next level.
Yeah, where do you want me to start?
I was going to say, let's open up.
Yeah, I know, man. I was going to keep talking. I was like, I need to shut up and let Brad talk. No, go wherever you want, man. Whatever part of it kind of jazzed you up the most. It was my favorite part of the book, personally.
So rest is really important. Mike, keep doing what you're doing, brother.
All right. I'm in.
Yeah, so, it's kind of like I alluded to earlier. What we found, and there is so much research supporting this, that it is a fact. And science is a search for truth. And I think on this topic, we are getting very close to like undisputable truth, which is that the body and brain, they do not grow, get stronger, get smarter, whatever word you want to use, while you are actively doing work. All that stuff happens when you allow either the body to turn off or the conscious mind to turn off. Sleep is like the number one thing. So no amount of short-term meditation or listening to music or nature walks will help if you don't have sound sleep habits. Physiologically, when you sleep, that is when all of the hormones that promote adaptation to training are released. So testosterone and human growth hormone, that all happens in your sleep. Psychologically, your brain, everything that you worked on or were exposed to during the day, your brain during your sleep combs through all that information, makes new neural connections, files certain information in different areas. That all happens when you sleep. So you could read a book, you could be studying for an exam, you could be working on a memo, a business plan, whatever it is, and it's almost like training, right? When you're working, it's like you set the stimulus for your brain to adapt to that in sleep and make sense of it and file the information so you can come back the next day and build on it. The other thing that happens when you sleep is your willpower kind of replenishes. So if you think about willpower not being something that's endless, the more that you sleep, the better that you'll be able to confront challenges and have the willpower to take them on. And I think that like there's no need to complexify or complicate this. Like anyone that's been sleep deprived knows that they're more likely to blow a short fuse and like lose their cool more easily, and that's willpower going. That their work suffers, and that's the cognitive side of things. And like one of the number one things that coincides with overtraining is an athlete that's sleep deprived, and that's just because they're not getting those growth promoting hormones that would otherwise keep them healthy and responding to the training.
Wow. You know, even though I love rest and I love sleep, I've been notorious for not being able to sleep before a race. And but last weekend in Chattanooga, I actually slept well, and it was palpable how much better I felt when I was putting my transition together in the morning. We were up at 4 o'clock, 4:30 or something like that, and I actually slept 6 hours or something like that, and it was definitely noticeable. So
nice. Did you take Ambien and chase it with beer?
No
totally
comment.
kidding. That is not a recommendation in the book, and that probably will not help your race the next day.
I was even afraid of melatonin. It makes me groggy.
That stuff. Yeah, the night before a race, that stuff's bad all the time, I think, but especially the night before a race.
I had maybe I'll go into this at some other point, and I'll email you guys. But I figured out a way to sleep, I think, that night, which is kind of cool. But so the sleep we all agree on is a huge thing to do with recovery and everything. I wanted to kind of get back into this mindfulness just a little bit. And I don't know if this is the thing that struck me because I'm from Wisconsin, but there was an experiment at Wisconsin where they had expert meditators and non-meditators, or just beginner meditators or something. And I couldn't believe they did this, to be honest, but they burned someone. They took a hot coal or what, a hot something. And
like a hot wire and
legs. And burned the legs of people. And what I found so awesome about this was that both reacted in the same way, with like kind of a pain, ouch kind of feeling. And then the expert meditators, though, let it go. And the amateur meditators kind of wallowed in that pain and just kind of kept going with it and thinking about it. And I just thought that was such an appropriate, analogy for endurance racing, especially like a run on an Ironman or something like that. It's that pain and the ability just to recognize it, right? And let it go.
Yeah, that's it. And not only did they feel that, they were also looking at these meditators' brains, and they actually saw the brain activity in both groups have a spike in the area of the brain that's associated with the pain. So like you said, both groups had like that ouch response. But what's really neat is in the non-meditator group, the part of their brain that's associated with anxiety just lit up and continued to light up and like escalate. Whereas the meditators, they felt the ouch and then it immediately went away. And I think like that is the benefit of mindfulness, right? It's being able to be in the moment, feel something, and not get consumed by it and have an emotional reaction to it. I think some of the experts that we interviewed in the book on mindfulness, they describe it really well, which is that so many sensations that we feel, not just in racing, but throughout the day in life, the sensation itself is a lot more neutral than we think. And it's our reaction to the sensation that causes all kinds of problems. And what mindfulness does is it gives you the space to decide how you want to react.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It's that is very well put. I think,
and to make it like really triathlon specific, right? For an athlete, I think what this is about is, maybe you're racing a 70.3 and you're at mile 7 of the half marathon, and it is starting to hurt. Mm-hmm. Well, that pain is real, no doubt about it. But the question is, are you going to get overcome by that pain and get anxious about that pain, and literally your heart rate will rise and and eventually you'll slow down? Or are you going to be able to sit in that moment and kind of ask yourself, like, wow, this is really uncomfortable. It's because I'm running 620 miles and I'm, I'm at mile 7. Like, no wonder it's uncomfortable, but I think I'm going to be okay. Let's try to get to mile 8 and then reevaluate. That is totally different than, oh my God, I'm going to blow up, I'm going to slow down, I'm going to get past. They're just super different reactions. And this stuff's been studied enough that we know that, like, this is not just like a feel-good, sing kumbaya thing. Like, it absolutely impacts your physiology, which of those paths you take.
I mean, that's the correlation this has in like so many areas of life. I think is just incredibly fascinating. It was one of the earliest things I learned when I got into recovery. It's a Buddhist principle. I think was that it's fear and anxiety. It's not the actual. It doesn't do the actual torture. It's the denial and the avoidance that it's actually occurring. Mm-hmm. And once you, I don't know the exact phrase. It's like, it's something bad happens or anger or anxiety or uncomfort or fear happens, and instead of avoiding, you say, I see you, I recognize you, and I'm not going to let you affect me. I'm moving on. It's the same thing comes in racing. Like you just alluded to it. It's that awareness of like, I understand this. It's not going to kill me. I'm not going to, physically. Denial is terrible in a million ways, but it's like that physical denial of, oh, well, this doesn't hurt, or I'm just not even going to deal with it, emotionally. I'm just going to like either give in or keep pushing to the point that I do explode. I just find it a fascinating approach that hopefully more people will take as far as is being, like I said, again, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And it's not even so much the uncomfortable part that you enjoy or get used to. It's that you're I guess essentially being comfortable with the fact that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and it doesn't have to ruin your day, ruin your race, ruin your job, or ruin a relationship.
Yeah, man. And I don't necessarily think that like you need meditation to do it. I've written about this before. I think that that's like, to me, that's the biggest benefit of endurance sports. Even more so than any of like the health benefits, or you keep a healthy body weight and low blood pressure, all that stuff's good. But I think that if you're a seasoned endurance athlete that has raced and been around the block, even if you haven't meditated for a day, my hunch is that you learn how to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's funny, like every single ultramarathon runner I've ever met in a professional capacity outside of running, they're always by far the most chill person. So like in the office, everyone's freaking out, or like, the family is freaking out, and they're just kind of like, everything's going to be fine. And of course everything's going to be fine, because they were at mile 85 of Western States hallucinating, and they got through it. So I think to me, that is one of the biggest values of the endurance sports and pushing ourselves physically, is that it really teaches us to be okay and sit with discomfort. Yeah. So I'm totally with you. And meditation absolutely helps. And I think for athletes looking to get to the next level, I would say that meditation is the ultimate way to do it. But just being an endurance athlete, I think, gives you a leg up on the general population in terms of dealing with stuff throughout the day.
Yeah. I think it is meditation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Beat me to it. Yep.
I think Steve, I don't know if he said this when you guys recorded, but Steve often talks about how even though lots of his elite runners don't meditate, his hunch is that if you put them in that study, they'd have the same response as the meditators did, and I totally agree with him.
Yep, I think it's a form of meditation. 100% agree.
Sure, and it's a way to really kind of connect with who you are and be in the moment. I mean, there's just no doubt about that, and that's really kind of what meditation's all about. So, we're kind of going towards the end here. So I'm thinking that. Do you want to kind of wrap this up with should we go into the parts about developing your purpose? I mean, because I think that, in a nutshell, it's about all this stuff is great and everything like that, but sometimes you really need to realign your reasons. And we talked about this a lot, Robbie, is find your why for doing all this stuff. And, you cited an example, was it Far Davis on the Appalachian Trail, and... maybe that wasn't the exact example of...
No, it was her. It was her.
Okay.
Yep.
But find something greater than yourself that's going to take you to a new place, essentially.
Yeah. The power of having that kind of self-transcending purpose for both how you feel about yourself and how you perform, it's pretty hard to state how powerful that is. Stuff actually happens in your brain. This is a gross summary, but stuff happens in your brain that makes you more resistant to fatigue and discomfort when you are doing something or devoting something to a cause that's beyond yourself. And the short of this is, over time, we've evolved to shut down at pain or discomfort or fear. And that's just an evolutionary mechanism to protect your body from doing harm to itself. So like that's why we evolved to feel pain. Pain is your body saying, whoa, like if I keep on doing this, I might hurt myself, let's stop. Some really neat research has shown that fatigue, it actually happens in the brain before the body. So what researchers have done is they've had people exercise to a point of complete fatigue where they report not being able to do a single additional repetition in the weight room or run a single additional step. And then they'll shock their muscles, and their muscles contract with full force. So what that tells the researchers is that their muscles actually have the energy to keep going, but the brain has basically shut down the body and said, like, nope, can't go anymore, you're going to hurt yourself. But that's so wrapped up in fear and in self-preservation. And if you meditate and you focus and you devote what you're doing to something that's beyond yourself and you step outside of yourself, you can kind of quiet that part of your brain that is wrapped up in fear and says, whoa, stop what you're doing, you're going to hurt yourself, and push a little bit harder. And of course, there are dangers with that because like you don't want to override the thing to the point where you're actually going to hurt yourself. But I think that a lot of people in a lot of areas of life could benefit from having a purpose or a set of core values or something that's beyond just like their self-concern. Yep. And reflecting about that and thinking about it. And again, here I am going down kind of the rabbit hole of pretty complex science, but I think the easy way to think about it is you look at any great athlete that has done something remarkable. So whether it's Jennifer Davis breaking the all-time record on the Appalachian Trail, whether it's Meb Keflezighi winning the Boston Marathon at 41, whether it's Craig Alexander setting the course record at Kona at I think 40. And they cross the finish line, and the media says, what were you thinking about in the backstretch of the marathon? Or what were you thinking about on day 32 of your hike? And they never say, like, I was thinking about how great it would be to be champion. Or I was thinking about, my payday or my sponsors being happy. Mm-hmm. It's always one of three things. It's I was thinking about being an inspiration for my community. I was thinking about how much my family has given to me to do this. Or I was thinking about a sick friend or family member and devoting this race to them. Or if they're a religious person, it's I was thinking about honoring my God. And those three things are all completely beyond the self. What's interesting is researchers have looked at this outside of athletics, and they've looked at people's job performance at traditional desk jobs. And people that report that they find that their job has a sense of meaning or is connected to something that's greater than themselves, they tend to perform better, have longer careers, and report better job satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That kind of brings it full circle, you quitting the lifestyle and getting into this. That's beautiful.
Yeah, man. I guess so. And I think that like again, not to make it more complex than it need be, like if you just ask yourself, right? Like if you're putting up with something shitty, and that can be suffering at the end of an Ironman marathon, that could be a rough stretch at your bureaucratic day job, or that could be, trying to write your first book and hope it does well and having fear. If the motivator is simply a paycheck, my guess is you're going to stop short versus if the motivator was some kind of greater mission. Whether it's to pay rent for your family, whether it's to inspire kids, whether it's to make a difference in the world, having that type of motivation almost always, in my experience working with people and what the research says, always helps people get more out of themselves. In the book, how we say it is, it's very ironic, but it's so true that the less that you think about yourself, the better yourself will become.
Yep.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we don't have to get into it, but I was thinking actually about the purpose story was the one about the University of Michigan professor that everyone told you to take his class. Is that?
Yeah, that's
did you ever get to take his class, by the way?
No, I didn't. We didn't overlap. Okay. But I've gotten to know Dr. Strucker through writing the book and through some other activities. That's my favorite part of the book by far. The section on purpose. I think it's the second to last chapter of the book where we tell Vic's story and how he came to be kind of the leader in this research. Touching, emotional, mind blowing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. And you talked about people like Josh Waitzkin and Stephen Pressfield. Have you met those guys, or is it just kind of based on what they've written? Because I love those guys.
For most of the folks in the book we met, although Pressfield and Waitzkin are actually two of the people that we just reported on based on some of the things that they've written. But those guys are great. I mean, everyone that we mention in the book is someone that I look up to. It's so neat to be able to kind of insert yourself into the lives, or read about and draw inspiration from people who are just totally crushing it.
Yeah,
I agree.
We're
going to do that with you, man.
You know, for me, that was like you said, like taking the self part out of it. I think a lot of it is that our egos are these like incredibly fragile things, even though we don't want to admit it, that doing it for somebody else somewhat removes that pressure of failing ourself or our ego, whether it's stopping short or self-sabotaging, a race or a job or relationship or whatever, and then finding it, within ourselves to go beyond for something else. It really, it like raises, I don't want to say it's courageous, but it's, I don't know, it takes away that, it takes away the fear of failure, I guess, in a lot of ways, because you're not failing if it's not about you, to an extent.
Yeah, I could not have said it better. That's exactly it, man.
All right,
so we'll end there.
Yeah, let's end it. Perfectly done. Way to nail it, Robbie.
Yeah.
So the book comes out again
June 6th.
June 6th.
Right?
It comes out June 6th. Yep, it's available for pre-order now. So if listeners, if you guys are hearing this before June 6th, it would mean the world to Steve and I if you're interested and you're going to buy the book anyways, to please pre-order it, because that helps with the overall sales process.
Yes.
And yeah, Steve and I, we love to engage on this stuff. So our purpose for writing this book was to help people avoid burnout and kind of sustain performance and avoid some of the pitfalls that befell us early on in our careers. So please reach out, email, on Twitter. Like, we want this book to not be an end in itself, but more so to start an ongoing conversation.
Where can they pre-order, man? Did you just say that, or did I miss it?
You can pre-order from Amazon, and most local bookstores should have the ability to pre-order too, but Amazon's pretty easy.
Okay. And do you want people to follow you on Twitter?
If they want to.
Okay.
Hey, listen, if you're listening to this podcast, you may as well follow him, because we've had many an episode based on a lot of his articles, so you go ahead and do it. But I would say that I can foresee this book coming out in like a pocketbook form, as like one of those things you keep in like your jean pocket and pull out and read here. And I think it's more like a peak performance manual than it is a book. It's everything that you need to hear and that you really know, but like Mike said earlier, it's just like so eloquently put. You're like, oh well, it's like you're subconsciously persuading me to finally, get my shit together and finally do it.
Exactly.
But it is. I mean, it was an outstanding read for me. And again, and I'll just say from my own interaction with you and Steve, simply just asking you guys to be on the podcast, they're incredibly personable and love engaging and connecting with people who want to connect and engage. So definitely pre-order the book. I know that helps you guys out, and definitely read it. And thanks again.
Yeah, Brad.
Thank you guys. This was a blast.
We enjoyed it too, man. I really appreciate it, and we'll be in touch, because I think that we could, like I said, we could probably do a podcast on every chapter. So if we want to get back and review it sometime, we'd love to have you.
I'd love to do it.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brad.
Yep. See you, buddy.